a more realistic picture of what's happening to democracy in Africa. As you know, we had a vice president of the candidate of the United States who recently ran, who thought that Africa was a single country and much of the population in the United States. So I wonder if you could give, as a general statement, your perspective on democracy in Africa today.
Democracy is really taking off throughout Africa. We have now 30 functioning democracies at different levels of maturity, but democracies nevertheless in which there are open societies where freedom of expression, freedom of choices are exercised, where there regular peaceful transition of power, but as I said, in different stages. But we're pleased that Africa has come a long way as a result of 2 decades of reform in economic and social structures.
Very good. And Madam President, could you speak specifically about Liberia and democracy? And I'm interested in 3 things, and you may want to just talk about them generally: citizen participation, development of political leadership, and local level of decentralization. My students were here during your re-election campaign, and they saw forces going on in all of these areas. And I wondered if you could comment on them, starting with, say, citizen participation in the democratic process.
We're very pleased with the freedom of choice, the freedom of expression, the freedom of association, the freedom of religion that all of our citizens enjoy. Today, as you go around the country, particularly women and young people who have probably been marginalized in terms of their participation in civic matters, but as you move around, the women today are empowered, they are emboldened, they sit in on meetings and they express their views. That to us is a great transformation. And so there are many times when we feel that we ought to do more in terms of informing them about the laws, the processes, so that this participation is even more enlightened. But I'm very pleased with the level of participation. And when it comes to political institutions, we have a functioning democracy in terms of our politics, but has not reached the level of institutional maturity. So you have many strong political leaders, you know, that provide the guidance, the lead for their institutions, but their institutions depend largely on them and their strong influence, their strong authority. And that's where we're working on now. How do we institutionalize the politics of Liberia so that it transcends any one strong, influential leader? Decentralization is a major priority of this government. We started with what we call deconcentration to make sure that we begin to push the determination of priorities, the exercise of authority away from the center to the periphery. In terms of fiscal matters, making sure allocations from our budget, rather than before all centralized through decision making, they now go to our political subdivisions for that. And a more rigorous decentralization is underway and that is being planned, giving more authority to local governance officials. If there's any constraint that we face in that regard, is building the capacity in our local governance so that they have the ability to manage those processes of development, the processes of social administration, the processes of political exercise and whatnot. So, but we're committed to that, and we're beginning to see the results. Most of our tribal authority, we have a traditional council of chiefs who are now giving a certain role in the participation in decisions. And so It's for us, it's going to be a multi-year program to achieve the maximum results that we want, but we're pleased with the progress that has been made so far.
Madam President, you just signed the new budget. Do you think there's a dramatic improvement in the decentralization process this year, say, compared to a year or 2 years ago?
I would not call it dramatic. I would say it's progressive.
I see.
Allocations that heretofore were managed with, let's say, with our concession sector,
Yes.
in which under their social responsibility, they allocate certain funds to the benefits of the communities in which they operate. Before those decisions regarding what was financed by those allocations was made by the representative of the concessions and by our ministries in Monrovia, that doesn't happen anymore. Now the citizens in those affected communities are the ones that make that determination. But it's not dramatic in the sense that through the budgetary process, we've now allocated huge sums and thereby having the central with no part. It is for us, if you may, a evolutionary, a progressive progress consistent with the ability, the capacity, of those in the rural areas, in our local government areas, to be able to absorb that. It also requires a lot of transfer of talent, transfer of skills, whereas before most of the people are concentrated in the capital city, where the better jobs are, where the better living conditions are. As we move development into those areas, we have to also now begin to move those skills and those institutions away. And that then will lead to more of a dramatic effect to which you referred.
Thank you. Madam President, I would like to leave Liberia for a while now, and I'll come back to it toward the end, but I want to talk about the region more broadly, West Africa. Not specific countries, but the region. Do you think that there is more cooperation going on among you, the member states in West Africa, and then I'll ask you about East and Southern a little later on, that is bolstering not only economic development, but also democracy?
No doubt about it. Liberia is an effective participating country in the West African community, what we call the Economic Community of West African States. And today we meet regularly in summit. We have institutions that meet on security matters, on development matters, on cross-border matters, on international matters, and they feed their discussions and their recommendations to the summit, and we take those decisions on a, you might even say, on a regular personal basis. President to president, head of state are always in contact with each other. If things do happen in one country, immediately talk to each other about how we can have a common view and a common response to issues that are arising. Whereas before, say, 5 years from now, most of what we discussed was on security, ensuring that our borders are safe, ensuring that we exchange intelligence information to monitor cross-border trafficking of people or drugs. But today we've gone beyond that. Today our summit now concentrate on interconnectivity. How do we make sure that we, in our quest for transformation, that we have those connections in power systems, road systems, communication systems. How do we broaden our economic potential to the place where we can have economies of scale, where comparative advantages can be used among our countries to be able to industrialize and to add value to our vast natural resources that exist. So West Africa is on a move. It's probably behind some of the other regions, exactly because of the infrastructure deficit. But we have the policies and a determination and commitment to catch up, and to catch up at an accelerated pace.
One of the dramatic results, I guess, of ECOWAS, or this unity among West African states, has been a visa-less transfer of people from one state to the next, moving from without a visa. Has it been more than that? How about goods and services across borders?
We have protocols that call for movement across borders of goods and services. Having open borders without visa requirement is, of course, a major ingredient.
Yes.
That helps a lot, but that's not enough. And again, it comes down to infrastructure. Today, our market women cross borders and go across to look for food, to look for garments, to look for things that they can take from surplus country into deficit countries. And they do it at tremendous risk because the roads are not there, because our institutions of border management sometimes have not reached the level of sophistication where systems can assist, and sometimes they get harassed. You know, customs officials, immigration officials who may not have the level of understanding as to the need for these cross-border movements. But those are the things that we are trying to address through training, through information sharing, to ease the market women who go across. But more importantly, to build the infrastructure and to build those institutions whereby you can have an ease of movement without going through these kinds of difficulties.
Madam President, address the Anglophone, Francophone divide that once characterized, I guess, West Africa perhaps more than any other region. Is that gone, or is that still a pronounced influence on the progress both economically and in terms of and politically?
That divide has diminished, but it's not totally gone. We still have a serious language divide. In several of our meetings, whether at the top level, summit at heads of states, or whether at other lower levels of institutional gathering, the ability to communicate one-on-one on issues is constrained by the language divide. So most times you have to have an interpreter, you have to have a translator in most of those meetings. We try to overcome it because our objectives are common, our goals are common, our commitment are common. And so we find a way using these intermediaries to still be able to communicate effectively. But it remains a constraint that will not be addressed until we address the language barrier. And that means that in all of our countries we must have language instruction starting from the primary schools that will teach people to become bilinguals all over the country. Now, trilinguals, because we also have Portugal, you know. We have Portuguese countries, so we'll have to address that. Until that time, well, there's also a lot of, the wars have also lessened the divide because many Liberians went to Guinea for refuge or went to Cote d'Ivoire for refuge. Today, they speak both English and French, and that helps the communication. And so, but like I say, we found a means to overcome it, but it lingers until we can solve it in a more fundamental way.
Madam President, you mentioned the war. Do you allow yourself the luxury of thinking what this country would be had it not been a civil war here that lasted, 15 years?
Oh yes, I reflect on that all the time. Before the coup d'etat, Liberia was well on the way, had its problems, had its development inadequacies and its structural deficiencies, no doubt. But it also had a capability to be able to address it because many Liberians had by then become well educated. We think largely the schism that divided us in our historical setting was still there, remnants of it, but still it was fairly divided through education, through intermarriage, and so the stage was set for development. Well, the coup d'etat interrupted that process of development, and we entered an economic free fall for a certain period of time. And even though there was some recovery for a while, then the Civil War, of course, exacerbated a situation that was already deteriorated. And so, in a way, after the Accra peace talks and democracy returned in 2006, you might say in many ways Liberia was starting from scratch. You know, rebuilding the institutions, getting people back in places, being able to address the huge infrastructure destruction that existed. So it's a tremendous task, and sometimes people forget when they try to compare Liberia to Ghana or to some of the other West African countries. They forget this whole period of destruction where we have to overcome. But we're not using that as a couch. Liberia has to move on. We have natural resources. We need to put in place the institutions. We need to make sure our allocations are right, our priorities are right. And to continue, we've made progress, and that progress is substantial, recognized internationally and at home, but that's not enough. We need to build upon that progress, putting aside the difficulties of the past. It's over. Can't change it. We have to accept it for what it is. The idea is to make sure we learn from those lessons of experience so that never again we can go back into a self-destructive situation, and we can use what we have for the good of the country to make sure that every Liberian feels like they have a future that has prosperity within its reach.
Agriculture was booming in this country before the Civil War, rice farming and so on. Has it ever recovered?
It's recovering. As you know, because of the displacement of people, many of those who had farms abandoned their farms. They went into urban areas, for safety. They went across borders into refugee camps. So the rebuilding of the farms, have started. There's been a very strong support from our international partners for building agriculture. Today, the production of our staple, rice and cassava, have increased significantly. We're still a net importer of our basic staple rice, but you can see that the import levels are going down, production levels are going up. Being able to even recover in our export crop, our plantation agriculture. The rubber industry is also going through crisis because of, during the period of war, most of the trees, were destroyed. Slaughter tapping was done, and so there's a lot of replanting. The new rubber crops that are coming up are just starting to come on stream. We virtually had abandoned our coffee and cocoa business because people, they receded into the bush because there was nobody to take care of them. There's a program now to resuscitate that, bringing their farmers back. Oil palm was a major exporter, and that also was an industry that was destroyed during the period of conflict. That too now, not only with our own farmers, but also attracting a diversity in our investment by bringing in Asian producers from Malaysia and Indonesia. The oil palm industry is now coming back into being. So it takes time. Some of these crops takes 5 years to mature, 7 years to mature before you begin to get the real full benefits from them. But we're pleased with the work that our agriculture ministry is doing. Food security, high on the agenda, aside from export crops that bring in foreign exchange and reserves. But being able to grow enough food to feed ourselves, we have rainfall, we have good soil. We just need to continue to support our small farmers, and we think we can move them from subsistence to surplus.
A new industry, relatively new, on the entire coast of West Africa, it seems, has been the discovery of oil. How will oil transform not only Liberia, but West Africa in terms of its wealth, in terms of its education, its youth, job opportunities, and democracy?
Great transformative element, oil, because here you're talking substantial sums of money that can really make a difference. I think if people look at Ghana today and you see the transformation of Ghana, of course, Ghana is also an agrarian country that has been very good in agriculture. But being able to industrialize has come a lot from oil resources. Being able to improve their infrastructure has had a major benefit from oil resources. And so it's going to be transforming. A lot will depend upon the policies of the government. A lot will depend upon the allocational efficiency that is applied to the petroleum sector and to the benefits that come therein. Liberia is a way off from that. We have had a discovery, but we have not had yet a commercial discovery. We expect next year with some drillings, we may get a commercial discovery. And this is why in this period until that happens, we need to make sure we get the laws right. And so our legislature with the executive, we have drafted new petroleum laws to make sure that those benefits that come will be directed at improving infrastructure to allow the other sectors of our economy to grow, to make sure that there's a sovereign wealth fund to protect future generations and make sure they share in it. And so that process is underway, and we hope we'll get all of that reform in place before the first barrel of oil is exported.
Is there collaboration among the oil-producing states of West Africa forming some kind of a consortium in expectation that a strong, unified West Africa might be a better negotiator?
We haven't yet moved toward a cartel.
I didn't want to use the word.
Their collaboration country to country, Liberia, for example, has held consultations with Ghana, with Cote d'Ivoire, with Nigeria, with even countries outside our region in our reform program to make sure that we try to get the best practices and the best examples. But coming together, as one to have common policies, we haven't reached there yet. Through collaboration, consultation, we're moving in that direction. But it will take a while, I guess, until we can get to a place where we feel we're strong enough to be able to do it. Until then, you still have a lot of influence, from the oil companies that manage these processes and that take a large share of these resources.
And of course, the collaboration or the contracting with the oil companies will be different from, say, with Firestone 100 years, 125 years ago in terms of the resources. You have more power now.
No doubt about that. Even the Firestone of 100 or something years ago is changing. We have, this government renegotiated Firestone concession agreement to make sure that we require more of them in terms of workers' condition, in terms of services to workers, and there's great improvement on the plantation as a result of that. And certainly we learned from the experience of many others. As we go into the oil sector, we've got our experience from the rubber concession agreements, from the mining concession agreements, to make sure that we make them better. There are many countries that may be ahead of us in terms of making sure that benefits to country, much, for example, local content, making sure that nationals have set participation in that is some of the areas that we're now looking at, and I think our laws and our policies can be made better to be able to ensure that this takes place, which is something that is a departure from the past.
Madam President, I will just ask you to touch on the next area briefly so I can then close and give you some relief from all of this. But as you look across the continent, outside of West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, and then North Africa, what do you see as the opportunities for the growth of democracy on the continent?
I'm a great optimist in this regard. If you look across the continent, you find that more and more they're open societies, they're institutions that are requiring accountability on the part of their government. There's more participation by citizens. There are regular, free and fair elections. There are pockets of problem, no doubt, here and there, and every now and then there's some conflict that arises that may lead to, some stepping back, some backward movement. But the forward movement is so progressive, so unstoppable that I said 30. The target is by 2050, which is our outside date of transformation for Africa, that all African economies by that time will be full functioning democracies. They may not be exactly what the Western style want. We may have here and there our own traditional type of institutional arrangements that may have to be respected and incorporated into our democratic programs. But democracy defined as participation, the exercise of choice, the freedoms that are enshrined in constitutions, I think you can be assured that all African countries are going in that direction.
You mentioned the expectation of what the West wants. Do you resent the West trying to tell you what democracy should be in Africa? And when I say tell you, I'm talking about you, the leaders, the people of the continent.
I resent them dictating to us. I don't resent them working with us and sharing with us some of their own experiences that have made the West such important democracies. But we've reached a place of maturity where we can determine our own systems. We can learn from them, we can benefit from them, but no longer can they just tell us what to do. I think every African country is committed to that ownership of their own process, and our processes may not be totally common across Africa. They may have differences. We have our chiefs and our traditional councils and their cultural values that some of it we want to respect and want to make sure it's incorporated into our democratic processes and institutions. But I think the West themselves now understand the importance of recognizing the places where we need to accommodate our own traditions and our own culture. And that's not to say that they're incompatible with democracy and participation. If you look at the example in conflict resolution and you look at the Gacaca in Rwanda, they would never have resolved their differences, following the genocide, if they had not introduced some of those traditional measures to short circuit the long period it would take in a formal court system. And so in Liberia, on our reconciliation program, we're also promoting the Palava Hut, which is something close to the Gacaca. And we hope that that too will help to bring about a process of contrition and forgiveness short of the court system where justice is. And we all subscribe to that also. But bringing in some of these things can just make sure that the process of reconciliation and peace move at a faster pace.
And how do you think the peace and reconciliation process here, I mean, you appointed a new ambassador of peace, I suppose heads the commission. Is there a process by which the implementation of recommendations still ongoing from peace and reconciliation?
Yes, there is. There is a reconciliation roadmap. Ambassador Weah has been made available of that. He's working on a program that will enable him to sit in communities and to talk about reconciliation, to talk about the Palava Hut. And so it's taking a little while getting started because the passage of our budget this year was slow. It just passed about 10 days ago. It's now becoming implementable, and so we hope that he and others, we have other institutions involved, the Governance Commission, the Independent Human Rights Commission, some of the young community leaders. So it's a question of his role combining, integrating in the roles of all the other institutions toward that common objective in which the different processes have been established by the roadmap.
So you see this as an integrative process across a number of institutions, not the whole, the sole ownership of one.
Absolutely. It's an institutional approach. One person has a role to play that integrates into the institutional approach. And besides, even though we have institutions, we have a symbolic figure who's joining, reconciliation has to come from each Liberian too.
Yes, yes.
Each one has to, in his heart, decide that they want to put the past behind them and that they want a future that is bright and a future belongs to all. And so we must go beyond that to call on all Liberians to be committed to that roadmap on a personal basis and their own involvement without any undermining the processes of justice. Wherever one demands it, we'll respect that also. But wherever one can use the process of peace and reconciliation, we appeal to all Liberians to be a part of that.
In terms of the re-election in 2011, you had substantial support, but didn't win on the first rounds, and there was to be a second round in which your opponents did not want to participate or did not participate extensively. Two questions. One, was that personally offensive to you? And two, does that injure the process of democratization that's ongoing here in Liberia?
It was not personally offensive to me. It was an injury to the country because democracy requires participation. Elections require participation. That's what it's all about, giving people the exercise of choice. And so being able to boycott is not a courageous act. One must be able to go through the process because you never know who will win in a democracy. That's the people's choice in a secret ballot system. To withdraw is to undermine that process. And so it deprived Liberia of a second fully democratized process of election. But it's over. That's what it was. We came out of it the best way we could. We headed into the next one. Let's all commit that in the next process that's coming, we will surely make it an exemplary democratic process to show Liberia's political maturity.
There were some 21 parties, I think, that were fielding presidential candidates at one point or another during the last election. Is there some kind of a convergence that you see which are sort of ideologically based, where there is one thrust and another thrust? And I dare not use the Democratic and Republican Party in the United States because I don't want to use that as an analogy, but how do you see the convergence taking place so that political institutions, party institutions, are strengthened?
We may have to do some of it through laws and through policies. The National Elections Commission will have to look at that to make sure there's certain criteria for parties to qualify. There may have to be just finding those that have shared values and shared ideas to come together, because our political institutions are weak. Like I say, they're dominated by key political figures, and that does not build a democracy that is sustained. You have to have institutions that are financially secured, that have participation levels in which there are many leaders and many influential people that provide the guidance. And we hope that all political parties will see the wisdom in looking within their own ranks and deciding that, I can now merge or affiliate with some other institution in which we have the same kinds of commitments, the same commonness in platform, and that will reduce the number of something. At the same time, like I say, we may have to have some laws that almost impose this, so that we can have in 2017 an election that's based upon viable political parties that can compete effectively and make sure that the people's choice are respected.
Just one final question. Yeah. Here, the last time we met during the election, we met a woman, her name was Mickey, and she said, we asked her, what did it mean to have a woman elected as president of her country? And she said, before the men would beat us, the men would rape us, and we would go to court and nothing would happen. And since Ellen Johnson Sirleaf came in, that doesn't happen anymore. Is the election of a woman president in Africa, and specifically in Liberia, that powerful a statement?
I think so, and let's say we've gone beyond that to the place where they feel confident enough that their rights will be protected, or that they can go to the courts and get justice. Today we're talking about empowering them through education. So we have a very aggressive literacy program for our market women. And today they can participate in any meeting. They have the means whereby if they feel that they've been sexually assaulted, we have safe houses to protect young girls. And so I believe a woman leader, beyond having what it takes to run a country in terms of qualification, commitment, etc., the sensitivity of being a mother brings a different dimension to women leadership. And I think that accounts for how they go that extra mile to make sure that not only women are protected, but they are empowered.
Okay, the last two questions very briefly. What do you see as the greatest threat to democracy in Africa?
Poverty. Today our population rates are very high. The young population in Liberia, for example, 70%, 35 years and under, with an economy that's not growing at the pace to be able to provide for them the education, the jobs that they required. And what that means without that is that the level of poverty could increase. Now, I grant you that the statistics are clear. Yeah. Level of poverty in Africa has fallen. It's a question of whether we can keep it falling at the high rate of population growth, and what we can do to balance that population growth with the increase in economic benefits, in investment, in job creation, in institution building. And each country is very aware and conscious of this, and see how we can make sure that that decline in the poverty rate continues, so that per capita income of people are increased to enable them to access education, to access health care, to access, more importantly, jobs for the young people.
When you ask citizens in Liberia, Ghana, anywhere on the continent, what is the greatest threat to democracy, they say corruption. Almost to the person, they would say that. Is that perception, or is it reality, or is it a combination?
Quite frankly, it's a combination. Corruption, pervasive in some places, not as pervasive in others, again comes from, one, the lack of confidence in the democratic process and governance. It comes in certain cases from poverty, where one feels that, I have to survive, I have to do what I can to live, to feed my family. It comes from the lack of the consequences of corruption, that in fact it takes away from the very thing that you would like to see the government have more resources to benefit the poor more, and that seepage, that leakage, of public resources that go either into private pockets or into ill-defined priorities, how it takes away from that which one, and so it's a combination of all of that, and something that we all our nation have to do more to speak about it openly, to talk about the consequences, to see the pervasiveness of this and how it can be attacked at all levels, not only high levels, but low levels, in public service, in civil society at large in many places. It is a problem. It's something that I think if we were to reduce the level of poverty, it would have a positive effect on the level of corruption.
Madam President, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and I appreciate your candor.
Thank you.
Thank you.